Part. Welcome to this episode of Betraying Israel, Part 3. It is an expose on Donald Trump. I'd like to begin this by shortchanging those who will have knee-jerk reactions to a criticism of Donald Trump by saying that I am definitely not a liberal. I have never been socialistic. As a matter of fact, I am a huge advocate and participant in free enterprise. I believe in free trade. I am an individual who cherishes personal responsibility and freedom. I'm a total advocate for free speech. I want less government, not more government. So among the reasons that I am not a Republican or pro-Trump is that they are not nearly conservative enough for my views. Now, there is another reason, and that is because I became aware that Donald Trump would betray Israel the first week of November of this past year, and I have since that time been forthright in sharing all of the evidence that has led to this point. And what I have foretold is that prior to the 22nd of May of 2026, 12 months from now, that the United States will play the leading role in the betrayal of Israel, such that Israel is forced to give up its heart and serve it up on a platter to the Islamic countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and Qatar, that wish to destroy it. I know this because Yeshaya, Isaiah, in the 17th and 18th chapters made this abundantly clear. And I have known that the United States would do this for some time. And it was about a year ago that I came to recognize that that timing is on or before Shabat, which is the beginning of Israel's troubles, the 7-year period prior to the Messiah and Son of God's return. And that Son of God and Messiah, so there is no mistaking whom I am speaking, is David, the former and returning king of Israel. Second, I realize that there are almost all MAGAs, by definition, are America first. I am not. I serve God. And therefore, since YAHOWAH puts Israel first, I put Israel first. And therefore, my primary bias is in favor of Israel. Those who threaten, abuse, or harass Israel are my foes. And so that is my agenda. Now, the thing that I want to avoid as we go into this is the myth that Trump is pro-Israel. Because I want you to know that all of his rhetoric that would create the impression of being pro-Israel is overwhelmingly offset by his actions. It's all a setup to confuse. Trump has already decided and already taken the bribes to undermine Israel, to betray Israel, and Israel will become infinitely more vulnerable than it is today to Islamic terrorism within the year. Also, before I return to the articles that I have written over the last month to share this news with you to prove my point, I would like to delve further into something that I hinted at in the first episode of Israel's betrayal. What I said was, I know how Trump is going to betray Israel. And I said, I'd rather not speak of it at this point because I don't want to give anybody any ideas until such time as it is made public knowledge. The news releases yesterday out of Europe indicate that not only was I right, but that now I can share with you how this is going to happen, since it has now been disclosed. Yesterday, the prime ministers of 3 countries, led by France and Macron, Starmer, in the UK, backing him up, and more quietly from Germany, there was the declaration that Israel has to end the war in Gaza and withdraw from Gaza and provide enormous amounts of food relief for the Muslims in Gaza that are devoted to killing them, or else Israel will be hit with international sanctions that are crippling to a country that does not float on oil. And that simultaneously there will be a United Nations referendum that will disclose the creation of a Palestinian state at a date certain, without any way of being able to separate oneself from that fate. And that the international sanctions on Israel, should Israel do anything to foreclose that determination, would be grievous. This is what Obama attempted during his presidency, but because he was known to be an anti-Semite, because he was known to harbor strong Islamic preferences, he couldn't pull it off. And there wasn't yet enough overt hate for Jews and raging anti-Semitism in the world at that time. There is now. And Trump is the one who can pull it off, because the majority of Israelis still believe that this Trojan horse has their back, when all he is doing is putting a knife in Israel's back. So what I'm going to tell you, I don't tell you because have a political bias. My only bias for politics is I don't like it. And I know this beast exceedingly well, far better than anyone who will chime in and try to either agree with or disagree with what I have to say. And I am the foremost expert on what the prophets have revealed in this regard, and so I speak for them. The place I want to begin this particular episode, now that I have laid that out, is the place that is the most dangerous of all for Israel, and that is with Iran. The day that Trump blindsided Netanyahu in the White House, when Netanyahu was sitting there in the chair to be abused in the adjacent to the Oval Office, and announced that he was going to begin negotiations with Iran on their nuclear deal, I knew that this was a ploy, and that the purpose of the ploy was to prevent taking out the nuclear capability of Iran, because at this point, Trump had already received billions of bribes from Qatar, from the United Arab Emirates, and from Saudi Arabia. And they didn't want that to occur at this time. And collectively, they told Trump to prevent it. And That's why the pretense of negotiations began. There was a 0% possibility that Trump was going to negotiate a deal that would have been favorable to the world, that would have prevented the accumulation of enriched uranium because, well, as I'm going to share with you, Iran already has the uranium enriched. They have the technology to assemble some 30 warheads with the amount of uranium they have already enriched. And they have the missiles and missile fuel to launch them. All this did was delay a month from what needed to be done. And in that month, the things that Iran needed to complete have been completed. So even as I shared this essay with you, it was written a month ago. And now it is all a fait accompli. So I want you to know that Trump is deceiving the world, and he is lying about the intent of the indirect chit-chat that he has had between Oman and Iran. Remember we said we had a really big meeting and it's direct meeting with Iran. It was all a lie. Everything the man says is a lie. There was no direct meeting. The negotiations are all through Oman, and there isn't anybody in Oman that's even remotely qualified to negotiate a deal on limiting nuclear weapons. And, they meet separately with Omani emissaries and chit-chat about where they might meet or might not meet again, and then go away. There is, of course, no progress towards a deal. And the Ayatollah came out yesterday after having last week said death to Israel, death to America. Came out yesterday and saying, we know there is no chance whatsoever that there will be a negotiated deal on our nuclear position with the United States. I wrote, there isn't one chance in a trillion that Trump's pretense of negotiations with the Ayatollah through the wholly unqualified Omanis will produce a favorable result. Iran does not trust Trump for obvious reasons, and Trump does not trust Iran since they have lied about their nuclear program from the beginning, claiming, for all years and years and years, it's just a commercial use. We have no intent of making a bomb. And the media, of course, just went along with it and lapped it up. And I said all along, there is Zippo as a chance. I'll say this again about Saudi Arabia, that a country that floats on fossil fuels does not need very expensive atoms to boil water. That's all a nuclear plant does, is it uses atomic fission with very, very low yields, 3-4% refined to 235 fissile purity, 3 or 4%. And it very expensive containment devices and security devices to essentially boil water. And the only advantage of it is if you don't float on a sea of gas or oil, atomic energy is cheaper. If you float on a sea of gas and oil and you actually discharge the gas by burning it because it's not as valuable as the oil, then you have no purpose whatsoever for a nuclear facility. But nonetheless, the United States started the one that is now being used in Iran. We gave it to Iran through the Shah. Atoms for Peace, we called it. And now the United States has committed to do the same thing for Saudi Arabia, part of the Trump mega deal package. So all we have from Iran is lying. It is customary for Muslims to lie about such things. Obviously, after all Iran has endured to this point, there is nothing that's going to cause them, after all of the sacrifice they have made, to surrender its 15,000 pounds of enriched uranium, nor even allow it to be investigated. And it has no purpose other than to make bombs. They are not going to shut down or dismantle their centrifuges that they have purchased at great cost and have buried at even greater cost, even though they serve no purpose other than to make nuclear bombs. They're not going to stop making missiles or give up their missile stockpile. They know that their nuclear program is well dispersed in many locations. They're exceedingly well fortified. They are deeply entrenched in mountains. It is impervious to inspection and relatively safe from destruction. So why the charade? As of February 2025, a few months ago, Iran was operating 36 cascades of IR-1 centrifuges, as well as 42 cascades of more powerful centrifuges. They have developed or deployed, they don't develop anything, they have deployed 27 IR-2M cascades, 12 IR-4 cascades, and 3 IR-6 cascades at the Nance fuel enrichment plant. In addition, Iran is operating a minimum of 6 cascades of IR-1 centrifuges and 7 cascades of IR-6 centrifuges at Fordo fuel enrichment plant. I love the name, fuel enrichment plant. Bomb-making plant would be the proper term. There are more than 1,000 centrifuges at the Nance plant, just the pilot plant, a secondary plant in Nance. 1,000, notably IR-2Ms, IR-4, and IR-6. As Iran deploys a number of its more powerful IR-2M and IR-4, as well as IR-6 centrifuge models, it is able to produce nuclear weapon fuel ever more efficiently and faster. Iran's centrifuges have already produced 7,000 grams or kilograms, 7,000 kilograms of uranium enriched well beyond civilian applications. Beyond this, the Iranians now have 250 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, U-235. This means that in a week's time, and I wrote this article a month ago, in 1 week's time, Iran's existing centrifuges can enrich half of that material to 90% or higher in the isotope U-235 for implosion bombs, and all of this stockpile within 2 weeks. That was 2 weeks ago. To accomplish this, Iran would rely on its centrifuges operating in production mode at either Nance or Fordo, and would transform its accumulated 250 kilogram stockpile of 60% enriched uranium to produce sufficient nuclear weapons fuel for 7 nuclear warheads in just 1 week's time, and 15 within 14 days, each considerably more powerful than the one deployed on Hiroshima, Japan. This analysis, however, assumes that Iran would use the 16 kilograms of highly enriched uranium metal with around 90% U-235 in the finished core of each nuclear weapon. This is the amount called for in a design for an implosion device that has circulated on the nuclear black market to which Iran has had access. Beyond these 15 massive nuclear bombs, Iran could use less material per warhead, assuming it would accept a slightly lower yield for each weapon. Just 7 to 8 kilograms of enriched uranium is required if Iran's weapon developers would be satisfied with an explosive yield slightly less than that of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. In such a case, it's just 7 days to 15 nuclear warheads and 2 weeks to having an arsenal of 30 nuclear warheads. But there's an update to this. This article was written by Iran Watch, by its scientists in February. 3 weeks ago, I reported that there is now proof of an Iranian tritium factory. And while that's important is because tritium is the isotope that triggers a much larger nuclear explosion. I've written a whole article and posted it both on X and on Facebook about tritium. But tritium is something you make at the very last moment because it is a very short shelf life. And tritium is used to dramatically increase the yield from the same amount of nuclear 235 fuel, such that now they can have, with the tritium, since they have had a tritium factory right out in the open for at least 10 years, is they have enough tritium to turn those 30 nuclear bombs into massive city killers. So at this point, we must conclude that Iran already has the uranium-235 enriched to the 90% necessary. It's it's a week's time in its centrifuges to take its fuel from 60% uranium-235 to 90%. A week's time. For all of it, it's 2 weeks' time. And that was almost 3-4 weeks ago that Trump allowed this negotiation process to delay, to give Iran that cover. And in addition, they now have a tritium source. So you can count on the fact that Iran has 30 city-sized killers, nuclear bombs. It's already over. There's nothing to negotiate. As far as the rest of it, and oh, by the way, even Marco Rubio came out day before yesterday in a post saying that the Iranians are already at the point of having a bomb. And it's not a bomb. It's 30 of them. As for the rest of it, even going back over a decade and before Iran and Russia became military allies due to the Ukrainian proxy war, the IAEA, I'll get that out if it kills me, International Agency for, pardon? Yeah, atomic energy. So energy atomic. So International Atomic. Oh, there's it. International Agency or International Atomic Energy Agency. Boy, there was too many vowels in that, but that is in fact it. IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, discovered and reported that Iran had developed the components necessary for a nuclear weapon and that they had undertaken all of the related research and testing. Their investigations revealed that Iran had nearly done all of the following. Had already done all of the following. There was no nearly in there. 1, computer modeling of implosion, compression, and nuclear yields. 2, high explosive simulating tests of a nuclear explosion using non-nuclear material in order to see whether the implosion device would work. What you do is you have a controlled implosion around your uranium-235 with a pocket of tritium in the middle of it, and it is the compression combined with the release of the tritium that causes the first atoms within uranium-235 to release the first atoms, and then more and more becomes a chain reaction. But you begin the process with a standard implosion that is spherical inward. So it takes some testing, it takes some know-how to do this, but that's how the bomb is made. They have constructed containment vessels at a military site in which to conduct high explosive tests. 4, they have conducted studies on detonation of explosive charges in order to ensure uniform compression in an implosion device, including at least one large-scale test. 5, they have received support from foreign experts in developing a detonation system suitable for nuclear weapons and a diagnostic system needed to monitor the detonation tests. 6, they have manufactured a neutron initiator, which placed at the core of an implosion device, and when compressed, generates neutrons to start the nuclear chain reaction, along with validation studies on the initiator design. 7, developed exploding bridge wire detonators, which are needed to initiate the implosive shock wave in fission weapons. 8, developed high voltage firing equipment that would enable detonation in the air above a target in the fashion of a nuclear bomb. 9, tested high voltage firing equipment to ensure that it would ignite the bomb over the long distance needed for a nuclear weapon. Number 10, they have developed a program to integrate a new spherical payload into Iran's Shahab-3 missiles, enabling the missile to accommodate the nuclear warhead. That is from the International Atomic Energy Administration Agency. Therefore, all talking does at this point is provide the time for Iran just to put all the little pieces together. Not only was Iran given the 2 weeks required and more to complete its enrichment between 15 and 30 warheads, and let's not kid ourselves, it will be 30 because they now have access to tritium that makes those 30 warheads more powerful than they actually require to completely destroy Israel. Once completed, bombing them becomes an unacceptable risk. For anyone aware of the history in this case and who is rational, they realize that there is only one potential way to preclude Iran from having a nuclear arsenal. It can only be achieved through the elimination of the entire Iranian nuclear program. And because Israel can carry a maximum of 2,500-pound bunker buster bombs, which, by the way, come from the United States on its fighters, while only the U.S.'s B-52 or B-2s bombers can deploy the necessary 30-pound bunker busters. My guess is that the B-52s can as well. They're just not radar evading. And because only the U.S. has the capacity to carry the 30,000-pound bunker busters, and because only the United States makes them, the task cannot be offloaded to Israel, as Trump once insisted. And then when Israel said, okay, we'll do the best we can. I mean, the best Israel really can do is to knock in the doors to the facilities, which would take 2 weeks to dig out again. But Israel can't take out Iran's nuclear program. They do not have the airlift nor the bunker busters that are sized to do it. Further, when Trump backed out and said, we'll do it through Israel, this was before he announced he was going to have the pretense of negotiations. Israel just said, okay, we'll do the best we can. We'll try. And I don't blame Israel for wanting to try. But Trump then stopped Israel from trying, and not only stopped Israel from trying, but then lied about stopping Israel from trying, and then admitted, okay, yeah, I did. I made it impossible for them to do it. And then he released the story to the New York Times. That's how horrible Donald Trump is to Israel. Since the U.S. emboldened Iran by giving it Iraq, which was the consequence of America's invasion of Iraq, and since the U.S. has solidified Russian-Iranian military ties by sanctioning Russia over the U.S. instigated proxy war against or using Ukraine against Russia, it is now an impossibility for there to be a negotiated settlement. And it's also because the Ukraine proxy war that the U.S. started against Russia and then sanctioned Russia has also put Russia and China together in a way never before. And then Trump decided that he would tariff penalize China, putting Russia and China closer together. And China and Russia have leagued around Iran. That's the basis of world war. So now the U.S. is trying to isolate China in a trade war, and it is rearming Ukraine to fight the Russians, strengthening the China-Russia-Iran alliance. The hot and cold wars actually have to end to resolve the Iranian problem. And when Trump has done so much that is counter to that, it has simply exacerbated the problem. Because without doing so, an international crisis that would lead to world war looms. And since Trump has grossly overstated the nature of this series of indirect talks, obviously in slow motion that happen every other week, sometimes for a couple of hours to discuss which coffee is going to be served at and what location to meet at next, there is no chance that there is going to be anything but a stymied position. And you should you be an Obamaite and believe that Iran can be trusted, here are some of Iran's breaches of the JCPOA deal made with them. July 2016, Iran began enriching uranium above 3.67 U-235 limit that was set by the Accord to a level up to 4.5% of U-235. You can't use uranium beyond 3.67% in any civilian use. In August 2019, Iran exceeds the cap of 300 kilograms of UF6 on its stockpile of low enriched uranium set by the Accord. In September 2019, Iran expanded its centrifuges and its research development beyond the limit set by the Accord, both in the number and the type of more powerful centrifuges in operation. A month later, November 2019, Iran resumed uranium enrichment at locations beyond those mandated by the Accord, including the Fordow plant and the Nance pilot plant. I mean, this was immediately after the deal was signed. This is, 6 years ago. And it was already being violated. This is obviously during the time before Trump won and during the Obama administration. So the Obama deal was being cheated on during the time of Obama being president. In January 2020, Iran stated that it would no longer limit the number of centrifuges in operation, which had been capped at 5,060 IR-1 centrifuges operating at the Nance fuel enrichment plant. July 2020, Iran announced plans to transfer more powerful IR-2M, IR-4, and IR-6 centrifuges from the Nance pilot plant to the Nance fuel enrichment plant. The accord limits Iran to the use of IR-1 centrifuges at low fuel enrichment only. November 2020, Iran installed IR-2M centrifuges and began installing IR-4 centrifuges at the Nance fuel enrichment plant and began uranium enrichment in a cascade of 174 IR-2M centrifuges at the Nance fuel plant. In January 2021, it began enriching uranium to the level of 20% U-235 at the Fordo plant, which and began in uranium enrichment in a second cascade of 174 IR-2M centrifuges at the Nance fuel plant. It began installing IR-6 centrifuges at the Fordo plant and uses a facility in Ifhastan to produce uranium metal, which the accord prohibits. February 2021, Iran went dark, no longer allowing inspectors foreclosing on the protocols to the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement and no longer allowing access under the accord. It withheld all data that was being recorded by the AIEA monitoring devices. It was censored and no longer sent. In April of 2021, Iran began enriching uranium up to 60% at the U-235 levels, which is 90% of the effort and time and energy for the 90% bomb-grade material. It's a week's time from 60 to 90%, which is why the more sophisticated centrifuges have arrived and are being deployed. In May 2021, Iran installed equipment to produce uranium metal in sufficient quantities for multiple bombs. In June 2022, Iran removed the IAEA monitoring devices that had previously been installed, pursuant to that 2015 accord. At the time, President Trump withdrew from being among the numerous signatories of the JCPOA. As a result of previous Iranian infractions, he demanded that all of the following occur, only one of which is now being discussed as part of the new agenda. Trump, you see, has been bought and is now owned and operated by Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates. President Trump, the announcement reads, is making clear that in addition to never developing a nuclear weapon, the Iranian regime must, 1, never have an ICBM. They have them. 2, cease development of any nuclear-capable missiles. They have a fleet of them. 3, stop proliferating ballistic missiles to others. That's what they've done in large degree. 4, and by the way, none of this is even part of the current discussions. 4, cease its support for terrorist extremists and regional proxies such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. No, that's not part of the current discussions either. 5, end its publicly declared quest to destroy Israel. Just a week ago. Death to Israel, death to America from the Ayatollah himself. But that's something the United States is no longer concerned about. 6, stop threats to freedom of navigation, especially in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. You know that where Trump lied and said that the American bombing effort had caused the Houthis to give up and capitulate, and so he was calling off the naval bombardment of the Houthis in Yemen. It was all a lie. The fact is, the United States effort had virtually no effect. The Israeli effort had a lot to do to cause the Houthis considerable pain, but the United States, billions of dollars, no effect. We lost 3 jets, many drones, had many bullet holes and other fighters, and made no difference. And Trump simply got frustrated that we were losing airplanes, spending a ton of money, and killing a lot of people, but making no impact. And so it was the United Arab Emirates, the new financier of Donald Trump, that said, why don't we just announce that the Houthis won't attack American ships, and you can make that a certain by sailing. Leave the zone. You're no longer there. They have no ships that they can attack. You can claim victory that they've said they're no longer going to attack American ships, and you just sail away. That's what happened. America has a liar and thief. 7, cease escalating the Yemen conflict and destabilizing the region by proliferating weapons to the Houthis. America gave up. Played for a month. We're out of here. End its cyber attacks against the United States and our allies, including Israel. That's no longer being discussed. 9, stop the grievous human rights abuses shown most recently in the regime's crackdown against the widespread protests by Iranian citizens. Not being discussed either. And 10, stop the unjust detention of foreigners, including United States citizens. None of that matters to him anymore. And you might want to say, so why doesn't that matter to you now? If that mattered to you in your first term, why doesn't it matter to you now? Technical assessments here was from IranWatch.org. It was their March 28th, 2025 publication from the White, and then the other was from the a publication from the White House fact sheet on ending U.S. participation in an unacceptable Iran deal of May 8, 2018. So those were the sources. My conclusion that there is no possibility that Trump will negotiate a superior deal to JCPOA through Oman, and that JCPOA was counterproductive. As a result of stalling through the pretense of a deal, Iran will conclude its nuclear weapons program with an arsenal of 30 warheads. It is largely because there is a relatively small possibility that the U.S., even with B-2s and 30,000-pound bunker busters, is capable of taking out all of Iran's nuclear facilities and stockpiles. And now Trump has been bribed to back away. And more troubling still, while the US's, NATO's, and UK's, as well as the EU proxy war using Ukraine to batter Russia continues, bombing Iran is like bombing Russia. It's like Russia bombing a NATO country at this point, in that it will trigger a world war with China and Russia against the United States. And of course, Iran against both the United States and Israel. And if you get all braggadocious, and you say, oh, well, we'll take out Iran, no big deal. The United States will whoop them. Well, the fact of the matter is the United States can't whip Iran. The United States couldn't beat Iraq, and Iraq is a tiny fraction of the size of Iran. It couldn't beat Afghanistan. And, before we went in, the fastest vehicle they had was a camel. No, it can't be done. The United States has a 0% possibility of being able to invade and occupy Iraq, Afghanistan, making bad situations worse in those countries. And they're infinitely smaller, not infinitely, but they're hugely smaller and less equipped. And they don't have the same level of allies nor weaponry that does Iran. The United States tried to go to war with Iran and do anything more than just take out its nuclear facilities. It would be disastrous. The whole result would be a trade war with China and a recipe for economic collapse for the world. It is an exceedingly difficult thing to report, but that's where Israel now finds itself, stymied by the United States, can't protect itself, and the United States is playing an exceedingly dangerous game, and the whole world is going to lose. Well, in related news, the U.S. is now negotiating directly with Hamas. Never did that before. But the United States is now negotiating directly with Hamas, leaving Israel out of the process. The headline reveals Hamas talks with Trump administration over a ceasefire. This follows early reports from March that the President Donald Trump and his hostage envoy, Adam Boehler, said that U.S. meetings with Hamas on the release of hostages were very helpful for Hamas, of course, but not for the survival of Israel. Boehler said that he did not rule out additional encounters with the Palestinian terrorist group, and he emphasized that he was acting in U.S. interests, not Israeli interests. It's in the U.S. interest to negotiate directly with Hamas. A proposal was put forward by Boehler to hold direct negotiations with Hamas to secure the release of American hostages. Boehler, who, with the president's approval, held direct talks with the group that has been designated as a terrorist organization since 1997. And the very fact that it was Qatar that negotiated the release of the American hostage, which tells you that it is Qatar that determines how those hostages are held. It is Qatar that paid Hamas the money necessary to perpetrate 10/7 and to hold those hostages. And it is Qatar that wields all influence over Hamas. And so all of the captives that have been held by Hamas, their abductions were funded by Qatar. Tahar al-Nono, a political advisor to Hamas, confirmed in March that the unprecedented talks with Washington were taking place with a major assist from Qatar. In my view, Trump's behavior is flagrant, deplorable, criminal, self-serving, and is likely impeachable. I would not care if not for the fact that Trump plans to give the heart of Israel to Saudi's crown prince as part of his deal of the millennia. Every action of President Trump reflects the will of those that are now pulling his strings. 1, he appointed Stephen Witkoff, Middle East envoy, knowing that he had absolutely no qualifications and that he had been bribed by Qatar, receiving $623 million from the Qataris. 2, immediately upon being put in that position, even before Trump took office, he forced Israel to capitulate to Qatar's and Hamas's terms on the previous ceasefire and the hostage exchange for Hamas terrorists, essentially putting Israel in a suicidal position. 3, he had offered the promise of building Saudi and Qatari-funded resorts in Gaza, which he said America would own. 4, the construction of emerald cities for Fakistinians in the Sinai and Jordan. Well, of course, but not in Saudi Arabia, all of which were abandoned when Egypt and Jordan said they didn't like the plan. 5, conducting a charade of a ceasefire negotiations to end the American-inspired Ukrainian proxy war against Russia, and of all places, Saudi Arabia. It doesn't have any influence over that situation, without even inviting Russian or Ukrainian representatives, all to enhance MBS's political status. 6, preventing Israel from destroying Iran's nuclear bomb facilities and then spilling the story to the New York Times. 7, negotiating a meaningless deal with Iran after the uranium has already been enriched, all while bypassing Israel, the intended victim. 8, firing National Security Advisor Mike Waltz because he supported Israel's right to defend itself from Iranian annihilation. 9, telling Israel to bomb the Houthis and then forming a truce with them that expressly excluded Israel, allowing further missile attacks against Israel while the United States simply sailed away. 10, renaming the Persian Gulf the Arabian Gulf. 11, announcing personal financial deals valued at $12 billion for Trump Towers in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all sponsored by the Islamic despots funding Israel's demise. On top of $2 billion for Trump's son-in-law, Kirshner, who played a lead role in the negotiation of this last round with atomic nuclear capability and $150 billion worth of U.S. weaponry to go to Saudi Arabia. And then there's $1 billion for Trump's former Secretary of the Treasury and the $623 previously given to Witkoff, not even including the $400 million of the Flying Palace. $16.5 billion. You used to be able to buy a president. Both Obama and George Bush received $20 million speaking fees for making a non-speech in Saudi Arabia at the end of their terms, obviously to side with Saudi Arabia during their terms. So $20 million was able to bribe them. But Trump, he is the art of the deal. $16.5 billion. And the Trump says, art of the deal, he's our guy. No one beats the Trumpster. No one has any morality anymore. The philanderer and thief. Announcing the first presidential trip, of course, that would be to his investors and those pulling his strings now, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all to exclude Israel, and not even recognizing the fact that Qatar is the acknowledged international bank of Islamic terrorism and is the one funding Israel's enemies. Qatar is far more involved in Israel's demise and spurring up anti-Israel sentiment around the world than is Iran. Far more so. Agreeing to sell 100 billion, actually now the number raised up to 150 billion of U.S. advanced weaponry to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, along with another 400 billion of nuclear technology and artificial intelligence. What could possibly go wrong? Announcing that Israel has frustrated Trump by his insiders acknowledging that Trump is now annoyed with the little Netanyahu, continuing his war, of course, that Trump bragged that he would end. I'll end it in a week's time, such that Israel is being excluded from all meetings and all deals that the United States is cutting. Rather than being America's ally, now the chief ally of the United States, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. 15. After complaining that the Gazans are suffering, previously he had acknowledged, the Gazans didn't do a thing to help any of those hostages. What they did was just abysmal. Now he's saying the poor Gazans, they're suffering. We need to feed them and make sure we take care of those who are committed to the obliteration of Israel. 16. Establish the Gaza Foundation to reward Jew killers, which will exclude Israel's participation while allowing Hamas to retain weapons. Now, how do you think the United States is going to orchestrate this Gaza Foundation to provide billions of dollars of food and other materials into Gaza while Israel continues to fight for their survival in Gaza? And people say, oh, it's fake news to say that Trump has said that Israel must capitulate and end the war. You're naive. You're ignorant. Negotiating directly with Hamas and Egypt and agreeing to allow Hamas to stay in power and to keep their weapons. 18. While Egypt is in complete violation of the Camp David Accords to demilitarize the Sinai, the U.S. said and did nothing. And of course, now there are multiple reports over multiple weeks that the White House is speaking negatively, even demonizing Netanyahu. And this is so that when he abandons Israel, the MAGAs will applaud. How great Trump is. He even turns on Israel. No one can stand up to the Trump. 20. Agreeing to equip Saudi Arabia with nuclear reactors, which have no purpose in Saudi Arabia other than a path to a bomb. Of course, this could all be a colossal coincidence. An unrelated price tag of 16 large, well, very, very, very large, or America and Israel, you have just been sold out to the highest and most diabolical bidder. Even you MAGAs need a new president because the Saudis and the Qataris bought your last one. And yet another announcement showing that Trump has abandoned Israel. Donald Trump has revealed that he is dropping the demand for Hamas disarmament and as a condition to a ceasefire. This is being reported throughout the Arab media that is being briefed by the participants in those negotiations with Hamas. According to the report, U.S. negotiators have conveyed this position during their recent conversations, both with the Egyptians and the Qatari mediators. The Trump administration officials reportedly signaled openness in talks with Egypt to delaying the issue of Hamas disarmament until after the ceasefire agreement is reached. An Egyptian source told Qatari-backed Al-Arabi Al-Jadid on Friday of last week. The source also said that U.S. officials believe that deporting thousands of Palestinian terrorists from Gaza is unrealistic due to concerns from potential host countries and a large number, between 3,000 and 5,000 people, being proposed by Israel. Moving all 2.2 million of them was not proposed by Israel, but indeed by Trump. So the journalist reporting this story got that all wrong. So according to the report, U.S. negotiators conveyed this position during recent conversations with both the Qatari and Egyptian mediators, but in their direct conversations with Hamas. And rather than insisting on the immediate disarmament, particularly of Hamas, the American side is reportedly open to addressing this issue at a later date. That same source also noted that U.S. officials believe that deporting Hamas military leaders or fighters from Gaza is not a viable option. In other words, Israel, leave Gaza, leave it to us. We're going to leave Hamas in power. They're going to continue to be armed. You lost the war. And you lost world opinion in the process. And now the whole world is turned against you. And there's a lot of money to be made and siding with those who want you destroyed. Arab media suggests that internal discussions within the U.S. administration have led to a reassessment of the effectiveness of Israel's current military strategy. Intelligence reportedly shared with American officials indicated that the renewed Israeli operations since mid-March had increased risks to remaining hostages. It's Trump's dealing with the Saudis and Qataris that have compelled him to abandon Israel, having nothing to do with anything else. Leaving Hamas armed and empowered is not only suicidal for Israel, it leaves the nation susceptible to the next October 7th, which now becomes inevitable. It means that the IDF ground war against Hamas is a colossal waste of time, money, and lives. And it further robs Israel of legitimacy and now the ability to defend itself. The fact that the United States is negotiating with Hamas and against Israel is tragic. And is now a pattern of behavior for Trump that will lead to sacrificing Israel to Saudi Arabia. And all the while, it is couched in the humane tactic of, I'm going to save the remaining 20 living hostages. And Israel played right into this. When you value 20 lives or 200 lives over the 7.5 million lives of Jews living in Israel, you've already lost. You committed suicide. And that was amongst the worst decisions Israel ever made, is to try to defend itself against the Islamic assaults while playing right into the hands of those Muslims who assaulted Israel by negotiating and giving them a reward for having abducted Jews, and realizing that Israel can be manipulated by hostages, which is a tactic that made Israel self-destruct. And Trump is just parlaying on it. And you've got all the progressives in Israel clamoring on behalf of Trump, saying he is the solution when he is selling you out. I know that the 20 innocent people that were stolen by the Muslim thugs, stolen by them and have been tortured by them, deserve better. And it would be wonderful to be able to save them. But when saving them comes at the cost of the survival of Israel, which it now has come down to that. The trade was grossly immoral, irrational, counterproductive, indeed insane. Trump has not only decided to abandon Israel, he will sacrifice the nation, the very heart of the nation, to Saudi Arabia, to pay them back for the monies they have given to him and for a Nobel Prize, to ensure the ongoing effort also of the petrodollar. If it isn't obvious to you, then it's likely that you are blinded by politics and simply don't care. Isaiah 17 and 18 are now like reading today's newspapers. America is the one, just as the prophet foretold, that would make Israel indefensible by imposing the two-state solution, thereby thinning Israel at the waist and opening the floodgates to millions of jihadists. I think we'll stop here. I think this has been a lot to handle, a lot to process. There's more to share, and in future programs, we will do so. It breaks my heart to have to report this news. I wish it were different, Israel, but it's not. And you need to know what you're up against. And you need to know that over the next year, you are going to be positioned such that you are forced to capitulate and give a state to the Fakistinians, where the world does not recognize that Palestine only exists to justify genocide against Jews. You're going to have a dagger right in your heart. This is what is forthcoming. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. This has been a news edition of the YAHOWAH blog, and I'm your host, Craig Winn.